All right, Mike. So we talked a little bit about getting our financial house in order, starting with a budget, getting to the point where we're paying off a little bit of debt. Now we're got some of our savings goals that we're working toward. Now we have a little bit of extra cash that we have each month, and we want to direct that toward more long-term savings goals. Can we start talking about investing, the different types of vehicles that we have, and different ways to invest, so that we can start working toward our financial future?
We can. That sounds great.
Awesome. So let's get started. We've got most people here saving for retirement, but there's more than one way, or investing for retirement, but there's more than one way to do that. Can you talk about some of the different investment vehicles that are available to us?
Yeah. So there's really a variety of accounts that you typically use for these longer term goals. We touched on the brokerage account versus the retirement account. So kind of the difference is a brokerage account, you can invest in similar type of investments, but you can access that money at any time. So if you decided to buy a stock or a mutual fund, tomorrow, and then 3 days later you decided, no, I really actually need that money now, you could sell that and pull the money back out. Potentially for a small impact of taxes for that, because again, a brokerage account is what we call a taxable account. So depending if you made money or lost money, you may have a tax implication for that. But again, over a short term, it's probably pretty minimal. And then, longer term, there are the retirement accounts. And the nice thing about those is they're typically tax advantaged. So there's two primary types you'll hear people talk about. One is traditional, the other is a Roth. And the difference is the traditional, you're getting a tax break up front. Your money's going in, and you're actually, depending if you qualify based on income and some other things, but you can actually, take that off your income that year that you make that investment. The Roth, on the other hand, is funded with what they call after-tax dollars. So that means, you'll pay taxes on it this year, but then it'll grow and be able to be taken out tax-free. You're not going to pay taxes again in the future. So those are kind of the three primary vehicles people use for, that longer-term investing type of activities.
Okay, great. So let's start with the brokerage account or the taxable account. So you'll hear it referred to both ways. There's no official term. So I want to go open a brokerage account, taxable account. Now I know there are many different places to do this. Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard are some of the big ones, but there are dozens of others. You get the Robinhood if you want to do it on your phone and get those apps going. So let's say I'm going to open the account. I'm going to put some money in there. What am I looking for to invest in a brokerage account? How do I start tracking that? How do I know what to invest in? And you mentioned tax implications. How do I know what taxes I'm going to be paying?
Sure. So, those accounts will have access to a variety of investments. Should have access to stocks, bonds. Then you have your exchange traded funds, also called ETFs, which basically is some company has put together a group of stocks. Typically, sometimes they have bonds in them, but typically a group of investments together, and you can buy them as a whole. And then there's also mutual funds. So those are kind of the broad investments that are going to be out there. There are some more esoteric things like derivatives and options. We're not going to dive that deep today, but those things are out there. So it's really trying to figure out what you're comfortable with. When we get into the TSP, we're going to talk some of the specific investments. But again, what I'd recommend if you're new to this, you want to keep your expenses as low as possible. So a lot of times that's looking at exchange traded funds that are tracking some type of index. Variety of those out there. Probably the most common that people will be familiar with is the S&P 500. 500 largest companies in the United States, and variety. You mentioned Vanguard, Fidelity. They each have their own version of that, but it's basically the same thing, interchangeable. So you'll find some set of investments that you want to make. lots of investing recommendations out there on the internet that you can look up and just understand again, what those generally are tracking, how diversified are they, but those are kind of the key things you're looking at. And I think you had one other question about the taxes.
The taxes, yes, sir.
So again, these are taxable. So if you put $10,000 in, you buy the S&P 500, and you let it in there for 6 months, and then you decide, I'm going to sell some of it and invest in something else. If the value of that was now $12,000, you've made a profit of $2,000. So you sell that, the government says, we're going to tax you on that $2,000 you made. You can have that $10,000 back that you've already paid taxes on. You don't get taxed on that, but that $2,000 you will have to pay capital gains tax on. And there's both long-term and short-term capital gains. So if you've held it less than a year and a day, you're going to pay short-term capital gains. So when I said 6 months, and that'll be taxed at whatever your income tax rate is. Now, if you held it longer than a year and a day, you're going to pay long-term capital gains taxes, and those are reduced. So for most people, especially starting out, that's going to be taxed at 15% versus, for a lot of folks, 22, 24% income tax. So there is an advantage to holding things longer, as long as they fit still your risk tolerance and where you want to be invested. But, so you do get a little bit of a tax break there for the long-term versus short-term.
Yeah. Now, I think that's a key. The most important thing to remember there is you're taxed on only the gain or the loss, and loss you can write off. We're gonna skip going into the details of that, but it is important to understand that you can lose money with investments, and if you sell at a loss, there is a taxable change to that as well. But many people have that misconception of, I invest my $10,000, when I sell that and I withdraw that money, they're taxed on all of it, and that's just not the case. They're only taxed on the growth, or again, they could write off a portion of the losses.
Yep.
Okay. Now let's transition. So the taxable account is important because it allows you to invest and withdraw at any time. However, you mentioned there are some tax benefits, some long-term tax benefits to investing in retirement accounts. So could we transition into that and talk a little bit about the different investment vehicles? Now, we mentioned a Roth and a traditional, but there are different ways to utilize those in the accounts that we're going to look at. So
Exactly.
Can we dive in and talk a little bit about IRAs, which is the most common individual retirement account, and then we have the TSP or 401k, depending on your employer status. So can you talk a little bit about the differences between those types of accounts?
Sure. So first the IRA, individual retirement account. Pretty much if you have income, you can open one of these. Whereas some folks, based on their job, may not have access to the 401k or TSP type of account. So again, individual, it's set up for you. And they have relatively low limits of how much you can contribute each year. So, but those are great if that's all you have access to. And again, both flavors, the traditional or the Roth. So again, the difference there is the traditional, you're going to get a tax break in the year you make that, you put your money into the account. On the traditional side, on the Roth side, you're going to get the you're going to pay taxes up front, but it's going to grow tax-free and then be able to be taken out tax-free once you hit your retirement age.
Okay. So as we're looking at individual retirement accounts, you mentioned there are contribution limits, how much you can contribute in any given year, but there are also income limits. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but can you have more than one? How does that work?
So you could have both those flavors, a Roth, a traditional, but you're governed by the total amount you can contribute each year. So you can, you could theoretically have more, if you opened one at Vanguard, then for some reason decided to open another one at Fidelity, that's perfectly fine, but you're limited on how much total contribution you can make in a given year. So right now, believe for 2025 it's about $7,000. And then if you're over the age of 50, the government lets you contribute an extra $1,000. So, and again, those get adjusted each year based on inflation. So typically toward the end of the year, you'll get the next year's numbers for how much you can actually contribute.
Okay, so if my limit is 7,000 because I'm under 50, then I could put 7,000 in a Roth IRA or 7 in a traditional, or I could split it in half and do 3,500 in each, as long as I don't exceed that $7,000 limit.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
Great. Now, there are some things you need to be aware of. Not everybody is eligible for a traditional deductible IRA depending on your income limits, and the same thing for a Roth IRA. Depending on how much you earn, you might exceed those limits. So I don't have those off the top of my head, but it's just something to look those up to make sure you are eligible so you can take those tax advantages.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about employer-sponsored, and that's going to be a retirement account you get through your employer. So in the military, that would be the TSP. If you're employed by a government agency, it might be a 403B, or you might have a 401k through more of a civilian type employer. Can you talk about how that vehicle works for investing?
Sure, it's very similar, but these would come directly out of your paycheck. Your employer will have some system you'll typically be able to log into, decide how much of your paycheck you want to direct to those accounts. Again, there are limits, of how much you can contribute each year. Some of those accounts, depending on the employer, you may get a match where the employer says if you contribute, say, 5% of your income, they would match, 4%, 5%. Some are very generous and they'll say we'll match up to the first 10% of your salary if you put that away. So again, that's can be a great benefit, but that's overall. And again, most of the time there are traditional or Roth flavors of those accounts also. Now on the IRA, similar to a brokerage account, you typically will have a wider number of things you can invest in, different funds, individual stocks, those type of things. Whereas an employer-sponsored plans typically have a narrow list of, hey, these are the things that you can invest in through this plan.
Yeah. Sometimes that's liberating because it puts limitations on you, which can be a good thing because it avoids that whole analysis paralysis and trying to figure out what to do. Other times, some people might feel like they're boxed in, especially if their employer plan has high fee funds and things like that. Well, it's impossible for us to cover every option that's going to be under a 401k plan because I don't want to say an infinite number of them, but there are a lot of them. But we can look at the TSP. So why don't we do that? The TSP is the Thrift Savings Plan. That's what military members are eligible for. They have a limited number of funds, but it's wide enough that you can have a fully diversified investment portfolio just using the funds within the TSP. Can we talk a little bit about the funds held within the TSP, what they're used for, and how we can use them to build a diversified investment portfolio?
I can. So, there are 5 primary funds within the TSP. So the first is the G Fund. And the G Fund is unique to the TSP. You're not going to find this exact type of thing on the outside. It's very similar to a money market type fund. So it's really just kind of paying interest, sort of like a high yield savings account, but it's specifically tied to some government rates. And so it more or less tracks inflation over time. So you're not really going to get a lot of, return above inflation using the G Fund, but that is one thing that is unique to the TSP. The second fund is the F fund that we talk about, and that is a bond fund. On the public side, probably the equivalent would be the AG or AGG fund, very similar, intermediate term bond fund, invests in bonds kind of across the investment spectrum. So again, bonds are fixed income. Basically, it's a company issues a bond when they need to borrow money. People buy these bonds and the company agrees to pay them a set amount of interest. So that will fluctuate, typically based on what the bond market is doing at the time. So that's, what you'll see with the F fund. Next fund is the C fund, which is basically the equivalent of an S&P 500 index, so the 500 largest companies in the United States. And then there's the S fund, which is smaller, small caps, but smaller, companies that aren't in that top 500. But again, a broad index of the smaller companies in the U.S. And then finally, there's the I fund or international fund, and that invests in international companies. There's been a recent change to that, maybe a year and a half ago. It's basically international or companies minus China that they took out. So, and again, that will vary across the size spectrum from very large international firms to smaller firms.
Okay, so we're looking at 5 core funds. We have 2 funds that focus on bonds and 3 funds that focus on stocks. So those 2 bond funds, you have a G fund, which is government bonds, and then you have the F fund, which is corporate bonds, and then you have the 3 separate stock funds, and those are going to be large U.S., small U.S., and then a more or less total international, developed international minus China.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Great. So with that, it sounds like government bonds, corporate bonds, that'll cover all of our bond needs or fixed income needs. And then with the stocks, we have large U.S., small U.S., international, which covers thousands of different companies. So with that, we have a totally diversified investment portfolio. Now, part of that, I know there are other funds. There are the L funds, and those have a number attached to them. Can you explain the L funds and why we really have 5 core funds, and the L funds are their own little entity, if you will?
Sure. So L fund stands for Lifecycle funds, and basically these are what I like to call the easy button.
Yeah.
And that number after them, or there is one that has income, L income, but typically they're 20, well, it's probably already gone to income, but 2030, 2035, 20, and they just released 2075. So every 5-year increment. And that's basically to give you the ability to kind of target when you believe you'll retire. So if you think, oh, I'm going to, be in my 60s and that's when I'd like to retire in 2050, you could buy the L 2050 fund, and underneath the TSP, the TSP gurus in the back decide how much they're going to put of that investment into the 5 core funds. So they will portion that money basically to part stocks. You'll have some in the C fund, some in the S fund, some in the I fund, and then some in the F and G funds also. So that will allow you to, you basically set that. And then as you get closer to needing that money, as it becomes 2040, 2045, they will change the back end and make that more conservative as you approach retirement. So you'll probably see those percentages shift from the stock fund that they may have started out to more into the bond funds, the F and the G funds, just to, as you approach and need that money, reduce the volatility. So, it's like I said, the easy button. If you don't want to mess with trying to decide, oh, should I put 30% in the C fund and 20% and then modify it every few years, those just make it very, very easy to do. And corollary, if you have a 401k or a 403b, typically they will have something similar. They may not call them life cycle funds, but they're also called target date funds. And they just, again, simplify this, reduce some of that analysis paralysis that comes up often when you're thinking about financial things. So again, it's a good option for folks that really, if they don't want to dive super deep and do their risk modeling and those type of things and just get it, they're doing something and letting somebody else handle all the details.
That's great information. So target date funds, I've seen those in 401k plans. You could also do it in an IRA, or you could even do it in a taxable account. Now, there are pros and cons to doing it in a
Right.
taxable account because as you transition into bond funds, and you have taxable events and things like that. So I usually recommend people do those inside a retirement account just because of the tax implications. Now, the target date funds or the Lifecycle fund and the TSP, it's a great place when you're first starting out. If you're brand new to the military, you don't know where to invest in the TSP, pick a Lifecycle fund. When you think you're going to retire, age 60 is fine. Plus or minus, you can always change it. When you're inside a retirement account, there's no taxable event, so you can change it as needed. That said, as you're growing and as your financial situation changes, I've changed now to where I have not only the TSP, but I also have a 401k from my civilian job. I have IRAs. I have a brokerage account because of needing things in a more intermediate term. It gets a little complicated. How should I look at target date funds when I'm looking beyond investments just outside? It's fine if it's my only investment in the TSP or a IRA. How should I look at target date funds when I have additional investments?
Yeah, the biggest thing is you want to take a whole portfolio view, always across all the accounts and figure out how those pieces fit together. You don't want to really silo unless there are tax reasons, where you're putting things. So it is important to understand that. So as you progress along, it may make more sense to, reduce some of the life cycle fund piece in the TSP, and maybe you say, hey, I need more exposure to the S&P large cap companies, so you're going to put an extra portion of that in the C fund because again you have something in your IRA that's offsetting that, and that's one of there are 5 funds. You'll be well diversified, but if you really get into this, sometimes folks are like, the TSP is too constraining. I can't, I want to have that small cap value fund or something very specific. They want to, I think I need to put some precious metals or something like that in as a diversifier. So again, the biggest thing is, looking at your portfolio as a whole and then adjusting, the individual accounts to, meet that portfolio construction you want.
That's a good tip, and that's kind of how I've approached on my own personal situation. I might only have one account in an IRA, but it's a smaller IRA, and it doesn't make sense to try to put 5 or 6 different funds in there when I can just do one. And as I'm looking at my entire portfolio, I just count it toward that little slice of the pie, if you will. Now, a shorthand tip. People have different situations, but you can look at the construction of a life cycle fund and model your portfolio after something similar to that based on what you have in a 401k plan or the TSP or individual accounts, et cetera, just as a proxy, if you will, for deciding how to slice and dice.
Sure. Yep.
We understand now the funds that are in the TSP. Let's say I've signed up for the TSP. I'm a new troop. Roth or traditional? What should I do?
So again, one of those it depends or personal situation type thing. But in general, the goal is to pay taxes when you're paying them at the lowest rate, and kind of defer taxes if you're at a higher rate, but you think maybe in the future you'll be in a lower tax bracket. So if you're just starting out, you're a new E1, O1, you're probably in a pretty low tax bracket unless, maybe you're married and your spouse is, a doctor or something like that you got a lot of money. But assuming you are in that low tax bracket, the 12, 22%, that's where you consider, probably paying taxes now, which means the Roth is going to be the way to go. And then, as you move up the ranks, again, or if you have a spouse and your combined income is significant, then you can start considering, does it make sense to defer the taxes, get that tax break in that year, because, in the future, I'll probably drop back down into a lower tax bracket in retirement. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb. In the middle, it's more of a flip a coin. because the math works out. If you stay in the 22% tax bracket all through, it doesn't really matter which you do. You're either going to pay now or pay later. But again, the math works that it'll end up being the same. It's really if your income tax rate is going to change at some point along that path that you'll need to kind of do some more homework.
That's fair. So just as a recap, when you're on the lower end of the earning spectrum, the Roth is almost always going to be a better situation because over time your earning capacity should change, and then hopefully you'll be in a higher tax bracket later. So when you make those withdrawals, they're tax-free, tax-exempt, and you don't have to worry about paying taxes then.
Exactly.
Perfect. Now, like the IRA, you can actually do a little bit of both, right? So if you're not sure what to do, you could do a little Roth, a little traditional, just as long as you don't exceed that overall contribution limit.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, here's a tip. I deployed 2 years ago. I was gone for almost 6 months. Because my money wasn't taxed, I was in a tax-exempt zone, I put everything into the Roth, which is the only time in the world where you're going to have the option to earn money that's tax-free, invest it without paying taxes on it, and then make that withdrawal in retirement tax-free as well. So, for that entire time, I was able to pretty much max out my TSP because I put it all in there. We had some income on my spouse's side, so we could live off of that income and put my military income just toward retirement. So that money is just going to have that triple tax benefit that you're not going to find anywhere else. So it's a rare thing. So if you have the opportunity to deploy, really look into the Roth TSP. There are some advanced things where if you're going to reach your contribution limit, you have to really be careful not to exceed it, especially if you're in the blended retirement system, because then it turns it off. That's a whole nother topic. That so we'll address that one at another time. So Roth is great, especially when you're lower income or if you're deployed because you're not paying taxes on that money. When you're in the military, I'm part of the high 36 or the high 3 plan, so I don't get a TSP match. But those who joined after January 1, 2018, or those who opted into the blended retirement system have up to a 5% match in the TSP. Can you explain how that works?
Sure. So, this is new, part of the newer retirement system. Not been going for now 7 years, like you said. So it's not brand new anymore, but. So part of the retirement for everybody, and the nice thing is, even if you don't go full 20 years to get to actual retirement, you're going to get to keep the TSP money that you got. So part of that is the government will now provide a match. So like you said, you get 1% automatic, just that the government's going to put in. And then you can earn more by actually you doing contributions. The government will match up to the 5%. So that just provides, you always want to get that. If you're in the BRS, you want to make sure you're contributing 5% of your salary per year so that you get that match, because it's basically free money, 100% return on your investment, instantly. So it's pretty much a no-brainer deal that everybody should be taken care of. And the nice thing is they've made it so that, that's the default, that you're going to, be investing enough to get that match. You can go in and turn it off, unless you got a great reason, don't do that, because again, that money, even if it's a small amount, compounded, over the next 40 years is going to be real money in retirement.
That's great. Now, I love the term free money, and in this case, it actually is.
Yeah.
It's not one of those, there's a caveat at the end. As long as you're putting in that 5%, you're going to get that 5% match. And that's huge. A lot of people don't understand how big that is, but just putting in 10% of your earnings, if you did that over a 20-year career or longer, you're going to have a very substantial portfolio at the end of that term, as long as you're doing more than just the G fund.
Yeah.
Again, we talked about inflation and how we have to work toward doing that. So you want to do something at least a little more aggressive than the G fund. So let's talk a little bit about those percentages. Obviously, when we're first starting out, we want to get at least that 5% minimum. But I remember when I was an airman, now this was 20 years ago, more than that, a long time ago. I didn't earn a whole lot of money. Now, I was living in the dorms and I didn't have any big bills, but I'm thinking about those E3s, E4s, maybe O1s and 2s. Maybe they have some student loans. Maybe they have a family and kids, and they're not bringing in a whole lot of income. They don't have a whole lot extra. Can we talk about, okay, let's try to strive for that 5% match? What if that's all they can do? And when should they start looking at trying to increase that if possible? And what kind of targets should we be looking at?
Yeah, so the general rule is if you're starting early, trying to get to 15% is a good goal. I mean, always encourage people to save even more than that if they can. But getting to that, if you start early, retiring at 65, that should get you a long way there, especially if you're going to, stay the full 20 and get a pension. You'll have lots of options as you near retirement. So yeah, that's definitely, but assuming you got to start at 5% and you're going to do that just because you want the free money. The one thing I like to, recommend to folks is each time, you get a promotion, even if you can do it at, when you get your yearly, when we get the, cost of living adjustments, go in and just bump it up 1%. It's a small amount that typically if you do it, especially if you do it at a promotion where you are going to get, a decent jump in pay, you're not used to that money. So you're not used to spending it. So if you defer it ahead of time, you'll never, you won't even notice. You'll still get some money coming in from that promotion. But again, you do that over time, and yeah, maybe it takes you 4 or 5 years to get up to 10 or 15%. But make those incremental adjustments, specifically at promotion. Maybe you do 2% at promotion and 1%, at the beginning of the calendar year when your housing allowance goes up, because for most people, maybe rent doesn't go up at that point. That's really what I like to recommend to folks. And then, as you get into 15%, you can decide, run some calculators, see if you're on track to, if you want to do the fire thing where you want to, retire super early, or, maybe as soon as you retire from the military, then you probably need to up it, keep going and get up to, the 25% of your income going into savings.
Yeah, so I'm hearing numbers like 15 and 25%. Those are huge numbers, especially when you're just starting off. I know when I was an airman just starting off, that was unattainable. 5%, I could handle that. But I do remember talking to one of my mentors early on, and he said, basically, he echoed what you said. Anytime you get that time and service grade or a promotion, just increase it 1%. And those little nudges, they work pretty quickly, especially early on in your career when you're getting those time and service, and those promotions come pretty quickly, to go from E1 to E2 to 3 to 4. You're usually there within 2, 3, 4 years, then O1 to O2 to O3, that you're there within 4 years, give or take. So those come pretty quickly, and those raises are fairly meaningful. So increasing your savings rate by 1% each time, generally pretty attainable.
Oh, yeah.
Now, as we're getting to mid-career, later career, our lifestyle has changed. We might have a family, might have kids, but our earning capacity has increased too. So hopefully we can use some of that extra earning capacity to increase our savings rate. We also, of course, have to keep in mind other goals as well, like buying a home. So it's a tough balance, yeah. But definitely some good advice there. Appreciate that. Now, as we're looking at this, what other advice would you have to somebody who's just starting out with their journey on the TSP, or maybe mid-career, not sure where to go next?
Yeah, so always get the match. That's kind of foundational. The next place to keep investing, you could stay in the TSP. If you've got a preference, for some other type of, investments that you can't get within those 5 funds, maybe you do the IRA. and then come back, and finish out the TSP. If your spouse is working and maybe they've got a very good 401k on the outside, balancing all that to really where kind of the best deal is to get you that portfolio that you're looking for. So it's kind of a hierarchy. And then as we talked about before, you may have those nearer term goals of, a house down payment or things like that, you want to put some in the brokerage, but, that gets into more of the art of, okay, what are my goals? What is my timeline for this money? And, and then it also goes to the Roth and traditional and having that kind of balance. Because one thing that you see, as you get older into retirement and, if you've been contributing all to traditional, that's a tax liability.
It's taking time off.
It is. There's somebody, that kind of coined that as, it is your Uncle Sam wants to get paid, and he's the co-owner of any traditional account, because when that money comes out, whether you take it out or if you even die with it and, pass it to your kids, they're going to get taxed at their rate when that money comes out. So understanding all that is important. That's probably more on the advanced side, but it's all things to keep, specifically if you get into that later career, you want to have a good understanding of that.
Well, that's great information. So just to kind of recap, we have our taxable accounts where we can invest in almost anything. When we get taxed on that is when we make withdrawals. We're only taxed on the change in value. Then we have retirement accounts, which gives us tax advantages. We've got our Roth and our traditional. Traditional, we don't pay taxes today. It grows without the drag of taxes. In retirement, we make withdrawals, then it's taxed.
Yep.
The Roth is the opposite. We pay the taxes today, but it grows without the drag of taxes, and then we get to withdraw tax-free. So the difference between the two is when I'm in a lower earning capacity, lower tax rate, I want to probably do the Roth, pay the taxes now while they're low, let it grow, and then in retirement, I can withdraw it as much as I want, don't pay any taxes. And then the traditional is a little bit on the opposite, where I don't pay the taxes today. Maybe that's better, perhaps, if I'm in a higher tax bracket and it grows, but I have to pay that later because Uncle Sam wants his cut.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Now, if you have the matching opportunity with the TSP, you want to get at least that 5%. Same applies to a 401k with your civilian job. And then we want to do more than that if possible. We're going to shoot for a target of maybe 15% or so, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to get there. So the easiest way to get there is to start off to get your match and then slowly, incrementally increase with cost of living adjustments, time and grade, pay raises, etc. That's awesome. That's a great place to start. I appreciate all this information. Thank you for sharing it with us. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.